Good Wednesday morning, everybody. Welcome to our first video in the series we're going to be doing where we're reading this book here, Wide Awake. And it's an honest look at what it means to be white. And it's written by Daniel Hill. If you don't have your copy, you can get one by just going to Amazon.com. I think they're $15 or less. Go get you a copy of that. When the video's over with, there are in the comment section, there will be questions that I've posted there. That are actually from the book. They're in the back of the book. But they're really thought-provoking questions that I want all of us to read, answer, really take time, spend time with this content that we're reading and these questions, and let them challenge you. That is the whole point of this. Learning, being challenging our minds, our thoughts, our thought process, our heart, our emotions, our spirit man. All being challenged by this, so we want to spend time after we read this stuff actually allowing it to do the work of challenging us and changing and reshaping the way we think about things. So Wide Awake, we're going to start with some of the foreword. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I am going to read a little bit of it, written by Brenda Salter McNeil. So here we go. You ready? Oh, also, one more thing. When this is over with, if you weren't able to be on our Facebook Live, you will actually be able to get this off of my YouTube channel. This is just the Rev Range YouTube channel. You'll be able to grab it there and listen to it over and over again. So here we go. As Christians, we must embark upon an awakening journey, a path that will lead us into direct confrontation with the narrative of racial difference. We must open our eyes to the uncomfortable racial hierarchy that has been the basis for the structure of our entire society. We must wake up to the ways that the narrative of racial difference has played as a major role in identity formation in the early days of our country, and to the ways it continues to play a dominant role in our sense of identity here and now. One of the primary issues we must face, especially in this socio-political climate, is the need for white people to do the hard work of wrestling with what it really means to be white. This points to one of the core messages of Wide Awake. The poisonous impact of the narrative of racial difference does not land solely on people of color. The narrative of racial difference has also profoundly affected white people. But unlike people of color, most white people remain completely unaware of the ways this narrative has affected their sense of identity. This writer here says, I often see this as a college professor working with young white students who are eager to engage in the work of reconciliation, but who seldom realize the degree to which they are also in bondage to the system of race. She's convinced that until they go through a Holy Spirit-led process of awakening, they will remain in a state of blindness. Wide Awake, this book we're reading, is a call to tell the truth. It is a call to follow Jesus. It is a call to find our deepest sense of identity in Christ, but also to realize that those who are white can't get there without breaking free from the distorted sense of identity they have internalized from the narrative of racial difference. This book will lead people on a transformational journey, and as we encounter Daniel's story of wrestling with his own ethnic identity, we hope that this is an honest reflection that creates a safe environment for others to embark on a similar path. For those of us who take this journey, this book has the potential to change hearts and minds and help Christians reclaim a message of reconciliation that repairs our interracial relationships and the structures that mediate those relationships. Let awakening to racial and social healing begin. Chapter 1, The Day I Discovered My World Was White. Now listen, before I get into this, buckle up, okay? I'm serious. There's some challenging things. There's going to be moments in here and I'll stop and I'll pause where I go, I had this problem. Have any of you experienced this? Because there are definitely moments here that as long as I've been in this and as long as I've been an agent for speaking out about racial reconciliation and racial justice, I still struggle because I'm white. I still have these things that I've had to work through in my mind or my spirit. So don't feel like you're going to be the only one who's ever been through this. So here we go. The day I discovered my world was white. It was a cold December weekend in Chicago, and I was excited. One of my best friends was getting married, and to top it off, he had asked me to officiate the wedding. I was honored by the invitation, though a bit intimidated. What if I botched it? What if I ended up being the guy the editor tried to remove from all the film footage? I was brand new pastor, and I had been in vocational ministry for less than a year, and this was my first wedding. My friend, the groom, was of South Asian Indian descent, and he was very proud of his cultural heritage. He had promised that the reception in particular would take guests on a deep dive into Indian culture and that we should prepare ourselves for a culturally unique experience. The reception lived up to the hype, and I had a night to remember. My personal highlight was the Dandaya dance, a group of people moving in two circles counterclockwise, holding two colorful sticks. I'm typically hesitant to get out on the dance floor, but the beauty of the Dandaya was compelling. When the dance ended, I was still feeling festive from the amazing experience, so I found my friend and I shared with him how much I had enjoyed every bit of that wonderful night. Then I innocently added the comment, "I'm jealous of you. You have such an amazing culture. It must be such a privilege to be able to reflect that beautiful culture during your wedding weekend. I wish I had a culture too." Now that right there. I have had similar thoughts. So if you're reading that and you went, "Oh, that's me," don't worry. So did I. Let's keep going. I had no idea how much was packed into that little statement, but it sure wasn't lost on him. He suddenly got serious, placed his hand on my shoulder, and looked me straight in the eye. "Daniel, you may be white, but don't let that lull you into thinking you have no culture. White culture is very real. In fact, when white culture comes into contact with other cultures, it almost always wins. So it would be a really good idea for you to learn about your culture." I found myself revisiting this conversation often. My friend was known for avoiding serious topics, so I had been surprised by the spontaneous intensity he had displayed. Most unsettling about it was his commentary on my white culture. First of all, I felt like he was lumping me into with every other white person he'd ever known. I thought, he can't seriously think there's just one white culture, can he? In an attempt to piece together the confusing message he sent my way, I reflected on the Irish heritage of my father's side and the pride many of my relatives took in it. Then I thought about the German and French heritage on my mom's side. I knew less about those cultures, but still, they were three very different backgrounds. Was he suggesting that those three distinct cultures could be mashed into a single category? White? That seemed like a major stretch. Then there was the even more unsettling suggestion that my culture wins whenever it comes into contact with another one. How many of you had that thought whenever I read that? Not only was he lumping all white cultures into a single group, he was also proposing that this single conglomeration consistently dominates other cultures. How would this not come off as insulting to a white person? What seemed utterly obvious to him was utterly confusing to me. But I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I searched for where I could find agreement with him. I could readily acknowledge that some white individuals exhibit dominant or even racist behaviors. Certainly, that was common ground. But even then, I found myself thinking, just because certain white individuals demonstrate prejudice or racism by their behavior doesn't implicate an entire race. I guessed that he would respond poorly to the suggestion that certain individuals of Indian heritage represent their entire race. Yet he seemed comfortable with the idea of poorly behaved white individuals representing all white people. I've had this thought. I know y'all have too. Don't play. This monologue continues to live inside my head longer than expected, and I anxiously awaited its end. Instead, it grew in intensity. I wasn't sure why, but it was becoming clear that God had provoked something in me through this brief encounter. My friend had opened a monumental door and had left me to decide whether or not to step through it. He opened me up to a whole new world, but I was unable to navigate it on my own. This next section is called The Quest. Compelled by these unanswered questions, I began reading books, articles, listening to TED Talks, and talking with anyone who would even appeared knowledgeable about the topic. While a number of interesting ideas were planted in the soil of my mind during that time, a conversation with an eventual mentor led to my initial epiphany. I had no previous relationship with this mentor, and after a steady series of my requests, he kindly agreed to meet with me. I wasted no time. I immediately peppered him with questions. I told him about the conversation with my friend at the wedding and shared my confusion about the claim that I was part of a larger white culture that dominates every other culture it comes into contact with. He patiently sat there, listened as I verbally sorted out my thoughts and feelings. When I finally finished, I pulled out my notebook, eager for answers. I was curious to hear his insights into these dilemmas and was ready to engage with his ideas, but he didn't respond to my questions at an abstract, intellectual level. Instead, he issued a personal challenge in the form of a reflection exercise. To help me begin my exploration, he invited me to catalog carefully the primary voices that informed me as a person and shaped my thoughts and values. To simplify, he organized the exercise around 4 groups of voices: my closest friends, the mentors I looked to for guidance, the preachers, teachers, and theologians I relied on for spiritual guidance, and the authors of the books I was reading. The instructions were simple, and I want you maybe to take a moment, stop, pause this video, and do this too. The instructions were simple. Comprehensively list them, and then take note of the cultural backgrounds they represented. So let me give you that list one more time. Stop, grab a piece of paper and a pen, and these are the 4 categories, okay? Your closest friends, the mentors that you look to for guidance, the preachers, teachers, theologians you rely on for spiritual guidance, and the authors of the books that you read, the kinds of books that you read on a regular basis. List them comprehensively, as many as you can. And then after that, take note of their cultural, after you do that, take note of their cultural backgrounds as they respond, okay? This next section is called this, Just How White My World Was. I started with my friendship circle, just as he had asked. Though I had some acquaintances in my broader network from diverse cultural backgrounds, I couldn't include them as close friends. So I made my list and everyone on it was white. Next up were my mentors, those I looked up to for advice during challenging times. It didn't take long to develop this list, as I quickly surmised that I consistently went to 6 different people when I needed guidance. When I listed them and noted what culture they represented, I realized they too were all white. The third category took the longest. I had become a serious student of the Bible by this point, so I listened to many preachers, teachers, and theologians. I wanted to ensure that my accounting was comprehensive, so I meticulously filed my way through the full archive of cassette tapes and CDs I'd accumulated. I had been encouraged to explore a diverse range of theological perspectives, so I had been influenced by everything from Pentecostals to Presbyterians. But I was stunned to discover, with the exception of 2 preachers, the entire roster was white. That last category I had been instructed to assess was authors, and by that point, I was sure of the conclusion. I followed through on the exercise just to be sure, but the results in all 4 categories were the same. The voices shaping me were overwhelmingly white. There's no crisp way to summarize all I learned during that self-assessment. I was awakening to a reality that had always been there, hidden in plain sight. But I finally had the eyes to see it. My closest friends were white. My most trusted mentors were white. The teachers and theologians shaping me were white. The authors planting new ideas in my mind were white. The church I worked at was white. Just like all moments of genuine awakening, the discovery was both liberating and terrifying. Liberating in the way truth always is, lifting you out of the fog into light, and terrifying because the revelation of truth demanded changes. I no longer had the luxury of living in ignorance, feeling good about myself while being blissfully unaware of the cultural influences in my life. I had naively thought that my personal transformation had happened the moment I chose to follow Christ. But I saw clearly in that shifting season of my life that the work was just beginning. And that's the end of chapter 1. So, take some time. You may want to watch this again, really soak it in, do your 4 categories, and then take note of the questions that are below in the comments. Spend some time thinking on them, and see what you come up with. And if you want to post, if you're brave enough to post your answers or some of your answers to the questions in the comments below, I want to read them, and maybe we even discuss them tomorrow right before we get into chapter 2. So yeah, thanks for joining me. I will see you tomorrow morning.